Welcome to This Explainer. We are diving deep into a comprehensive university-level masterclass today, embarking on a forensic textual deconstruction of what is easily one of the most widely debated phenomena in antiquity, the biblical gift of languages. Now, to do this properly, we're going to set aside centuries of subsequent tradition, emotional assumptions, and cultural practices. Seriously, all of it. Instead, we are going to rigorously and objectively analyze the primary ancient text to extract exactly what the historical grammatical data actually reveals. We are treating this as an exhaustive scholarly study, utilizing strict structural and syntactical logic. Okay, let's dive right into our syllabus for this study. 1. Defining the gift of languages. 2. Babel and the Acts 2 reversal. 3. Public signs for unbelievers. 4. Private prayer and spiritual edification. 5. The reality of angelic languages. And finally, 6. Limitations and assembly regulations. Starting with Section 1, Defining the gift of languages, reframing the archaic lexicon. Before we can even look at how this gift operates, we really have to redefine our foundational terms based strictly on the original Koine Greek source material. So according to the original Greek manuscripts, the primary noun used in the text is glossa. Now, this word possesses two literal definitions. The first is simply the physical, biological organ, literally the tongue in your mouth. The second definition, used by standard metonymy, refers to a structured, syntax-bearing spoken language of a specific people group. It denotes an actual grammatical human language. You see, when foundational English texts like the King James Version were translated over 400 years ago, the word tongue was the standard, culturally understood synonym for a foreign dialect. Think of the phrase mother tongue, right? We still kind of use that today. But as the English language evolved over the centuries, the word language became the exclusive standard identifier for linguistic systems. Concurrently, the word tongues got hijacked. It was adopted by modern theological frameworks as a highly specialized term, and today it's often natively associated with ecstatic or unintelligible utterances in various contemporary movements. Because the original first-century text utilized the standard everyday word for a human language, forcing the modern reader to encounter an archaic, theologically loaded term represents a massive failure of functional translation. This is exactly why modern optimal equivalence translations like the Christian Standard Bible, or CSB, accurately use the word languages. They actively discard the archaic term to preserve the original authorial intent of structured communication, completely removing any modern notion of ecstatic gibberish. And this brilliantly illustrates the real danger of semantic drift. Clinging to traditional, archaic terms creates massive historical misunderstandings. It essentially allows modern traditions to just overwrite the standard first-century communicative meaning of the text. So, to ensure absolute textual consistency and clarity, this explainer will exclusively use the term languages, adhering tightly to the most accurate modern translations. Let's move to Section 2, Babel and Acts 2 reversal, the theological macro-narrative. We're transitioning to the historical precedent of diverse languages here, because to truly understand the events of the first century, we have to audit the ancient text of Genesis. According to the ancient text in Genesis 11, verses 5 and 7, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language. Deeply analyzing this passage reveals that the judgment at the Tower of Babel was a highly localized restriction. It was placed explicitly and entirely on terrestrial humanity, the sons of men, specifically to disrupt their unified disobedience and geographic centralization. God essentially utilized language to scatter humanity. Furthermore, because the active, omniscient creator is immutable, it is structurally impossible that God's own communicative framework was somehow altered by this event. God's language remained completely unaltered. The confusion was restricted entirely to the human realm. According to the forensic textual scholarship of Dr. Michael Heiser, the distribution of languages we later see in Acts chapter 2 is engineered as the explicit theological reversal of this very Babel event. Dr. Heiser performs a brilliant lexical syntactical analysis, connecting the geographic dispersion at Babel to the theological explanation provided in Deuteronomy 32. Based on ancient Dead Sea Scroll fragments, God actively disinherited humanity at Babel, dividing the nations and placing them under the administrative jurisdiction of lesser spirit beings, referred to in the text as the sons of God. And the creation of diverse languages was the exact mechanism of this division. So when we finally arrive at Acts chapter 2, the Jewish diaspora gathered in Jerusalem represented the totality of those 70 disinherited nations. Dr. Heiser's thesis concludes that Pentecost is the systemic, deliberate reversal of Babel. God utilizes the exact same linguistic variables, miraculously spoken human languages, to bypass the administrative boundaries of those sons of God. The gift of languages served as the authorized divine mechanism to officially initiate the reclamation of those scattered nations right back into the divine family. Moving on to Section 3, Public Signs for Unbelievers, Evidentiary Validation. Let's shift our academic lens to the public operational parameters of this gift. In the Book of Acts, the focus is squarely on the use of these languages as a verifiable empirical sign. Now, looking at these two accounts reveals an incredible thematic continuity. According to Acts 2, regarding a Jewish audience, the text states, "We hear them declaring the magnificent acts of God in our own languages." And then, according to Acts 10, regarding a Gentile audience, it says, "For they heard them speaking in other languages and declaring the greatness of God." Whenever the localized content of these public languages is actually translated by the text, it is universally defined as the doxological magnification and exaltation of God. When the language is publicly understood by the listeners, the content is always about declaring divine greatness. And this brings us to the actual mechanics of evangelism in the Book of Acts. It is absolutely vital to understand that the unlearned languages themselves were not the evangelistic sermon. The event actually operated sequentially. Step 1 was the supernatural validation through unlearned languages. The speakers vocalized actual human dialects they had never learned. Step 2. This served as the primary empirical hook. It completely bypassed human resistance and arrested the attention of the unbelievers by supernaturally declaring the magnification of God. It was this supernatural validation that then provided the structural authority required for Step 3, the actual cognitive, intellectual call to repentance. The evangelistic message itself was subsequently delivered by Peter in a universally understood shared dialect. The language was just the empirical sign. The cognitive preaching was the evangelism. Well, this establishes our understanding of the public events, but now we move to Section 4, Private Prayer and Spiritual Edification, the shift to Corinthians. We have to signal a major shift here from the public manifestations in Acts to the highly localized assembly issues addressed by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians. According to 1 Corinthians 14:22 in the Christian Standard Bible, "For the person who speaks in another language is not speaking to people but to God. Since no one understands him, he speaks mysteries in the Spirit." This text introduces a profound functional divergence from the Acts account we just looked at. In Acts, the language was directed externally toward humans as a sign, but here, the target audience changes entirely from man directly to God. In this private context, the operation of the gift functions completely differently. First of all, the direction shifts entirely Godward. The text reclassifies the vocalization specifically as prayer, singing, and giving thanks directly to the Creator. Secondly, and crucially, this private function intentionally bypasses the human intellect. The human understanding is completely disengaged. The text establishes a rigid structural dichotomy between the human spirit and the human intellect. In this specific function, the human spirit is communicating directly with God, speaking hidden spiritual mysteries. Because the audience here is the Creator himself, this mechanism results in internal structural self-edification for the speaker. It actively builds up the individual's spirit despite the total absence of intellectual or cognitive comprehension. It's a direct spirit-to-spirit communion. Let's transition to Section 5, the reality of angelic languages, textual plurality. This brings us to perhaps the most frequently debated aspect of this entire topic, so we need to prepare for strict logical and syntactical analysis regarding the spiritual realm. Which raises a really fascinating question. Do angels actually possess their own communicative language? And if so, was it confused alongside humanity at the Tower of Babel? To answer this, we look to primary evidence. According to Job 38, at the very foundation of the earth, the sons of God, which are angelic beings, are described as singing and shouting for joy. This proves that angelic entities possessed and utilized a vocal communicative capacity at the origin of creation, chronologically long before the Tower of Babel even happened. And since we already established that Babel was explicitly restricted to terrestrial humanity, angelic communication remained entirely unaffected by it. This brings us to a critical text. According to Paul in 1 Corinthians 13:1, "If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal." Paul is employing an a fortiori argument here. It's a Latin term for a rhetorical escalation from the lesser to the greater. He is deliberately anchoring his statement in a literal baseline before escalating it to an extreme hypothetical limit. And this brilliantly illustrates the linguistic structure he's using. The literal baseline is the human languages, which the Corinthians were historically and actively practicing right there in their assemblies. The theoretical absolute is the angelic languages.
the highest ontological order of communication imaginable. The conditional phrase, if I should speak, functions as hyperbole, but strictly regarding the human mastery of that language. He is basically saying, even if I could speak the absolute highest language of heaven, without love it means nothing. However, grammatically, human languages objectively exist. Therefore, structural symmetry demands that the tongues of angels also designate an objective reality. The text structurally affirms that angelic languages actually exist, and it points to them existing in the plural, even if no verifiable data in the text explains their exact linguistic origins.
We now enter our sixth and final analytical phase: limitations and assembly regulations, procedural containment. We must emphasize that despite the highly supernatural nature of this phenomenon, the primary texts reveal it was never meant to be an uncontrollable, chaotic event. So the crucial point is understanding the strict behavioral boundaries set for the corporate gathering. If an uninterpreted language is vocalized in public, outsiders and unbelievers will misdiagnose the phenomenon as madness. It becomes completely counterproductive to the assembly. However, if that language is publicly interpreted, translated so the human mind can actually comprehend it, it achieves exact functional parity with the gift of prophecy. It transitions from private mysteries to providing direct cognitive edification and instruction to the entire church. This mandates the absolute necessity of interpretation for corporate utility. Because of this, the Apostle Paul instituted exhaustive administrative frameworks in 1 Corinthians 14. First, there is a strict numerical limit, a maximum of 2 or 3 speakers per gathering. Second, they must speak sequentially, taking turns. There is no overlapping or chaotic shouting allowed. Third, mandatory interpretation is absolutely required for any public speech. If no interpreter is present and the speaker cannot interpret their own language, the rules demand total public silence. The individual must restrict the manifestation strictly to the private vector, speaking only to themselves and to God. And this proves a massive theological point. The human operator retains absolute free will. The manifestation is not some kind of ecstatic trance. The speaker has full cognitive agency and is completely required to exercise voluntary restraint. Reinforcing the incredible strictness of these biblical parameters, according to 1 Corinthians 14:28 in the CSB, but if there is no interpreter, let each of them keep silent in church and speak to himself and to God. This perfectly synthesizes our entire forensic study today. The gift of languages possesses a breathtaking public function, an evidentiary sign of unlearned human dialects used to empirically validate the magnificent acts of God. It also possesses a profound private function, a direct, non-intellectual spiritual communion with the Creator for personal edification. But in the corporate assembly, it is bound by absolute order, requiring translation to ensure the cognitive building up of the entire church.
Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to consider. If the ancient primary texts established such rigid, structured boundaries for this gift, requiring actual linguistic syntax, mandatory interpreters, and absolute sequential order, how much of modern religious tradition actually aligns with the raw historical source material? It's a question that demands we look past our cultural assumptions and courageously audit our own beliefs against the text itself. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive.